Socrates was killed, not for any crime of violence, but for asking too many questions, for encouraging people to think, to challenge authority, to look past the stories they'd been told and think for themselves. Van Gogh died in poverty. He only sold one painting in his lifetime. He was mocked, ignored, called mad. Now, his work is worth hundreds of millions and hangs in galleries that would have never opened their doors to him while he was alive. Nikola Tesla imagined a future no one else could see. He gave us wireless technology, alternating current, dreamed of free energy for all. But the world wasn't ready. He died alone in a hotel room, while others got rich off the inventions he never profited from. Time and time again, society doesn't celebrate deep thinkers while they're alive. It resists them, ridicules them, erases them, because the truth they see is often too much for the present to handle. We wait until they're gone, until their ideas feel safe, non-threatening, marketable. Then, we praise them, we build statues, quote them in books, put their faces on t-shirts. But when they were alive, we called them dangerous, delusional, crazy. Why? Why do we only start listening after it's already too late? If you think about this stuff too, if you've ever felt out of place for thinking differently, you're not alone. Stick around, hit subscribe. Drop a like if this already has you thinking, because the ones who see the world clearly need to find each other. Society doesn't fear intelligence, it fears what intelligence reveals. Most people can accept brilliance as long as it's entertaining or profitable or harmless. But deep thinking isn't harmless. It digs beneath the surface. It questions what people take for granted. It refuses to just go along. And that's where the trouble begins. Because when a deep thinker speaks, they don't just introduce new idea, they challenge the old ones. They hold up a mirror to the world, not the one we post on social media, but the one we avoid in silence. And that mirror, it's not flattering. It shows the cracks in our systems. It shows the weakness in our arguments. It shows how much of our daily lives are built on illusion, repetition, and habit. And for many people, that's unbearable. It's easier to label a thinker crazy than to sit with the discomfort they bring. It's easier to laugh them off, dismiss them, exile them, than to listen. Because listening might mean changing, and change is terrifying. Most people are not looking to be shaken. They're looking to feel stable, safe, certain. Deep thinkers don't provide that. They do the opposite. They introduce doubt. They question the foundations. They make people feel like the ground beneath them might not be so solid. That's not a welcome presence in most rooms. That's why so many brilliant people end up alone. Not because they were broken, but because they were honest. And honesty, when it cuts deep enough, becomes a kind of threat. Imagine a society built on tradition, on unquestioned rules, on stories passed down, not because they're true, but because they're comfortable. Now imagine someone walking into that society and asking, why? Why this rule? Why this system? Why do we pretend everything's fine? They won't be met with applause. They'll be met with suspicion, resistance, anger, because deep thinking has never been neutral. It either transforms you or threatens you. And when society feels threatened, it fights back. Sometimes it fights back with silence. You get ignored, pushed to the margins. Sometimes it fights back with mockery. You're labeled arrogant or depressing or unstable, and sometimes it gets violent. Think of Socrates. Think of Hypatia. Think of Bruno, burned for suggesting the stars were suns. These weren't criminals, they were thinkers. Their only crime was seeing too clearly. So why does this keep happening? Because deep thinkers don't fit. Not into systems. Not into institutions. Not into polite conversation. They're too hard to manage, too unpredictable, too unwilling to play along. And in a world that values fitting in, they become outcasts. But here's the thing. That's not failure, that's the cost of clarity. Wisdom has never been about approval, it's never needed permission, and it rarely shows up looking like success. Because success, as we define it, often demands compromise. It wants you to be agreeable, digestible, simple. But deep thinking isn't simple, it's messy, it's painful. It's often quiet and slow and invisible. It doesn't play well on stage, it doesn't trend, and it doesn't sell easy answers. That's why the world doesn't know what to do with deep thinkers until they're gone. Only after their death does society feel safe enough to listen. It's no longer threatened. It can now repackage their ideas, put them in museums, quote them on coffee mugs, and pretend it always valued them. But that's a lie. When they were alive, they were inconvenient. They were told to stop thinking so much, to lighten up, to just follow the rules. But they couldn't, not because they were stubborn, but because they were awake. And once you wake up, it's impossible to go back to sleep. There's a Stoic principle that fits here. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That's Epictetus. It's not a motivational quote. It's a warning and a challenge. The path of deep thought is lonely. People will misunderstand you. They will question your sanity, your value, your purpose. And if your goal is to be liked, you'll give up. You'll shrink yourself. You'll stop asking the questions. But if your goal is to live truthfully, even when it hurts, then you're in good company. Socrates didn't care about being admired. He cared about waking people up, and he paid the price. Nietzsche knew his ideas were uncomfortable. He still wrote them down. Galileo knew the church would punish him. He still looked through the telescope. These people weren't celebrated in their time. They were seen as dangerous. And yet, look how their ideas have endured. Look how their warnings echo today. If anything, society's fear of deep thinkers tells us exactly how much they matter. Because the truth doesn't need to be popular to be powerful. It just needs to be spoken. And if that means being misunderstood, so be it. You're not here to be palatable. You're here to see clearly. And the clearer you see, the lonelier it gets. But that clarity, that's what makes it worth it, not the applause, not the recognition. Just the simple, quiet act of not looking away. So when the world tells you to stop thinking so much, think deeper. When it tells you to relax, to conform, to keep the peace, ask the harder question. Because deep thinkers aren't a threat to society. They're its conscience, and without them, everything falls asleep. Let it stay awake, even if it doesn't want to. Throughout history, the pattern repeats itself. A thinker sees the world more clearly than others. They speak the truth, sometimes gently, sometimes defiantly. And for that, they're silenced. It happened to Socrates. He didn't fight with swords or armies. He simply asked questions, dangerous ones. Why do we believe what we're told? Who decided the rules we follow? Are we living wisely or just repeating tradition? He challenged the foundations of Athenian society, not with violence, but with thought. And that was enough. The city put him on trial for corrupting the youth, for challenging the gods. But his real crime was much simpler. He taught people how to think. When given the chance to escape execution, he refused. Instead, he drank the poison hemlock willingly. He chose to die rather than abandon his principles. His final words echo like a whisper through time. The unexamined life is not worth living. There's a kind of bravery in that, a stoic kind, to hold on to truth even when it costs you everything. Then there was Galileo. He looked through a telescope and saw what others refused to see. The Earth wasn't the center of the universe, it moved. We moved. And in that small shift, everything changed. His discovery shattered centuries of religious certainty. The church, fearing a collapse of control, branded him a heretic. He was forced to stand before his accusers and recant, to say he was wrong even though he knew he wasn't. He lived the rest of his life under house arrest. His work was banned, his truth buried, but the earth kept moving. And his story reminds us that even the most obvious truths will be denied, if they threaten the people who profit from the lie. Friedrich Nietzsche saw through something else. He looked into the soul of society and found hollow comfort. He said our morality wasn't virtue, it was fear. A set of inherited rules we follow because they feel safe. He rejected that. He called for a new kind of strength, not built on religion or tradition, but on individual will. The courage to create your own values. People called him mad, too intense, too dark. His books were ignored, misunderstood, twisted. He died alone, his mind unraveling, his ideas dismissed. And yet today, his thoughts shape psychology, literature, modern philosophy. He saw something we weren't ready to see, and like most clear-eyed thinkers, that he paid for it. Nikola Tesla, too, was ahead of his time. So far ahead, the world didn't know what to do with him. He dreamed of wireless energy, free power, a world connected without wires or walls, a future that wasn't just advanced but generous. But generosity doesn't sell, and his vision threatened the profits of men like Edison and J.P. Morgan. So they cut him off. Funding disappeared. His projects stalled. He was mocked, cast aside. He died in a small New York hotel room, alone, broke, and forgotten. While the world got rich off watered-down versions of his inventions, Tesla didn't fail. He scared the system, and the system erased him. Then there's Alan Turing. He didn't wear a uniform, but he helped win a war. He cracked the Nazi codes at Bletchley Park, shortening World War II and saving millions of lives. He also laid the foundation for what we now call artificial intelligence. But Turing had a secret. He was gay. And in 1950s Britain, that was enough to destroy you. Despite his service, despite his genius, he was arrested and chemically castrated by the state. He died shortly after by suicide at just 41 years old. Only decades later did the world begin to honor him. Too late to matter. Turing's life is a reminder that even heroes aren't safe when they don't fit the mold. And not all misunderstood thinkers were men. Hypatia of Alexandria was a philosopher, a mathematician, and an astronomer. In the 4th century, she taught logic and reason in a time of growing religious extremism. She was respected by many but feared by those in power. Her presence, an educated, influential woman teaching critical thinking, was too dangerous. One day a mob dragged her from her chariot. They stripped her, killed her, and burned her body. Her writings lost, her name buried. For centuries she was almost forgotten, but her legacy lingers in quiet ways. A symbol of what happens when brilliance comes from the margins. When truth wears the face of someone society isn't ready to hear from. Across all these stories there's a common thread. It's not just about intelligence, it's about timing, about power, about fear. These people didn't die for being wrong. They were punished for being too right too early. They saw through the illusions society depends on. And that kind of clarity is dangerous. So we ridicule them. We isolate them. We erase them. And only when it's safe, when they're gone, when their ideas are no longer a threat, do we celebrate them? Call them geniuses. Put their quotes on posters. Pretend we always believed in them. But deep thinkers rarely live to see their vindication, because society doesn't change when it's comfortable. It changes when it's forced to. And it's usually the ones who make us uncomfortable, who end up shaping the future. So if you've ever felt out of step, if your ideas don't fit, if your thoughts run too deep, you're not broken. You might just be early. So why does this keep happening? Why does society turn on the very minds that push it forward? It's not just fear of change, it's fear of exposure. See, deep thinkers don't just bring new ideas, they hold up a mirror. And most people don't like what they see. Not because they're evil, not because they're stupid, but because illusions are comfortable. We build our lives on certain beliefs, about the world, about ourselves, about how things are supposed to work. And when someone comes along and quietly shows us those beliefs are wrong, we don't feel enlightened. We feel attacked. Even if the thinker says nothing cruel, even if they speak softly, even if their only weapon is a question, it still hits like a threat. Because deep down, people aren't just afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of having to start over, to rebuild how they think, to admit they never really knew what they were talking about. That kind of humility is rare, it's painful, and not everyone is willing to go through it. So instead of wrestling with the truth, most people just reject the person who pointed it out, not through debate, not by engaging the idea, but by labeling them. Weird, arrogant, too intense. Too much. It's not an intellectual argument, it's emotional self-defense. We defend our worldview the same way we defend our home, by shutting the door, by locking it, by calling anything unfamiliar a threat. This is why society doesn't just ignore deep thinkers. It isolates them, punishes them, sometimes even erases them. Because deep thought doesn't just challenge the facts, it challenges the framework. And people cling to the framework, even when it's broken. There's a Stoic idea that explains this well. It says, don't expect the world to love the truth just because it's true. Truth doesn't walk into a room and get a round of applause. Truth walks in and gets asked to leave. It makes people uncomfortable. It ruins their dinner. It shifts the spotlight away from comfort and toward responsibility. Because if something is true, then the question becomes, what are you going to do about it? That's the part nobody wants to answer. It's easier to pretend the thinker is wrong or crazy or dangerous and then to admit they might be right. This is especially true when the truths they speak cut against what society is built on. Power, money, tradition, control. You can say the sky is blue all you want. No one's going to care. But say this system is built on a lie. Say what you think is morality is actually fear. Say there's a better way, but it means letting go. Now you're dangerous. Because now you're not just asking people to think, you're asking them to change. And change feels like loss. Even when it leads to something better, it first feels like death, of identity, of certainty, of safety. So society reacts the only way it knows how, by preserving the illusion. At all costs. It's not always violent. It's often quiet, subtle. You get passed over. You get unfriended. You get that look in the room like, why can't you just let things be? People don't have to scream at you to exile you. All they have to do is stop listening. That's what makes it so hard for deep thinkers. It's not just that their ideas are dismissed. It's that they're dismissed with a smile. Like, that's interesting, but let's move on. Don't overthink it. Why do you always have to be so intense? But deep thinkers can't turn it off. It's not a choice, it's how they see. They don't mean to ruin the party. They just can't pretend the cracks in the wall aren't there. And once you see the cracks, you can't unsee them. That's the thing no one tells you. There's a cost to clarity. It doesn't make life easier. It makes it heavier. Because when you can see through things, you lose the comfort of illusion. You lose the bliss of ignorance. You lose the ability to say, well, maybe it's not that bad when you know it is. And that level of awareness isolates you. Not because you're better, not because you're above others, but because you're outside the script. You don't play along. You don't nod politely when something feels off. You don't accept just because as an answer, and that puts you on the edge. You might still live among others, but your mind drifts outside the borders of what's accepted. That's the root of the fear people have toward deep thinkers. It's not the thinker themselves, it's the mirror they carry. People look into it, and for a split second they see themselves clearly. The contradictions, the borrowed opinions, the quiet fears. And then they shut it. Not because they hate the mirror, but because they weren't ready to see. So they close the door, they pretend the reflection never happened, and they go back to what's comfortable. Until one day, maybe years, maybe centuries later, someone finds that mirror again, and this time, they're ready to look. That's when society changes, not when the truth first arrives, but when enough people are finally brave enough to face it. That's why this keeps happening. It's not a glitch in the system, it is the system. We resist what threatens our illusions, until the pain of staying blind becomes worse than the fear of opening our eyes. So if you speak the truth and get silence in return, if you bring insight and get labeled difficult or too much, if you feel like the world keeps slamming the door before you can even finish your sentence, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It might just mean you're early. So what do you do then? When you see things others refuse to see, when you ask questions that make rooms go quiet, when the more honest you become, the lonelier it feels. What do you do with that? The Stoics gave us an answer. Not a glamorous one, not an easy one, but a strong one. You accept what you cannot control, and you master what you can. You don't chase applause. You don't beg to be understood. You don't water yourself down to fit in. You hold your ground. Quietly. Steadily. You live with integrity, even if no one notices. Especially when no one notices. Because here's the hard truth. You don't get to control how the world reacts to your clarity. You don't get to decide if they listen. You don't get to force recognition. You don't get to demand understanding. The only thing you own truly is your own response, your own values, your own behavior, your own character. The Stoics called this the inner citadel, a fortress inside yourself that the world can't reach. People can insult you, ignore you, twist your words, but they can't touch what's inside unless you let them. That's your power, and it's quiet. It doesn't get headlines, it doesn't get standing ovations, but it lasts. It doesn't need the crowd to survive. It just needs you to show up for it every day. Marcus Aurelius said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Simple, hard, unshakable. The Stoics believe that wisdom isn't measured by recognition. It's measured by alignment between what you believe and how you live. You don't speak the truth because it's popular. You speak it because it's right. And you don't stay silent just because it's easier. You stay honest even when no one claps. That's the mark of someone who's truly free. Because think about it. If you only speak what others approve of, you're not free, you're performing. And if you only feel strong when you're praised, you're not strong, you're dependent. The Stoics flipped that. They said, control what you can, let go of the rest. And what you can control is your mind, your effort, your principles. You can't make people understand you, but you can make yourself clear. You can speak with precision, act with integrity, live in a way that honors the truth even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and lived his whole life under the rule of others, said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." That means no more waiting for the world to catch up. No more looking over your shoulder hoping someone will finally get it. You just live the truth, consistently, quietly, and let the world react however it will. If it rewards you, good. If it ignores you, also good. Because your actions weren't about the reward, they were about alignment. That's the difference between being loud and being strong. One needs the crowd, the other stands on its own. So when you start to feel isolated, when you wonder if it's even worth it to keep speaking truth, to keep seeing clearly, remember this. Clarity isn't supposed to make you popular. It's supposed to make you free. And freedom costs something. It costs the comfort of being liked. It costs the ease of fitting in. It costs the warmth of false agreement. But what you gain is far greater. You gain self-respect. You gain mental resilience. You gain a sense of peace that doesn't shift with other people's moods. That's real stability. That's what the Stoics called ataraxia, a kind of unshakable inner calm, even when the outside world is chaotic. You're not chasing certainty from others. You're building it inside yourself. And yeah, it's lonely sometimes, but it's also clean, clear, honest. There's a strange kind of peace that comes from no longer needing to be understood, from no longer needing to win every conversation, from no longer shaping yourself to avoid discomfort in others. You just live, you speak, you stay aligned, and over time you begin to notice something. The people who do resonate with your truth, they find you, slowly, quietly. You don't need many, just a few is enough. People who value depth, people who can sit with discomfort, people who would rather be challenged than coddled. They exist. They're rare, but they exist. And when you meet them, the connection is real. It doesn't need performance, it doesn't need masks, just presence, just mutual respect. But even if you never find them, even if you spend your whole life being misunderstood, the Stoics would say, that's still a life worth living, because you lived it honestly. You didn't sell out, you didn't betray yourself, you didn't lie to fit in. That's courage, that's clarity, that's wisdom, even if no one claps for it. Seneca said, "A great mind becomes a great fortune," and he didn't mean money. He meant richness of thought, depth of character, a kind of wealth that no one can take from you, because it was never built on their approval to begin with. So if you've ever felt the weight of thinking deeply in a shallow world, if you've ever felt like clarity is a curse, remember, you're not alone. You're walking a path many have walked before you. Socrates, Marcus, Epictetus, Seneca. None of them were popular in their time, but they lived fully, and they died free. You can too. If you've ever been told you think too much, if people squint at you when you ask questions they're not ready to answer, if your silence makes rooms more uncomfortable than your words ever could, you're not broken, you're just early. You see things others are still learning to notice. You feel truth before it's safe to say out loud. You carry depth in a world addicted to the surface. That's not a flaw. That's not something to fix. That's a signal. You are part of something ancient, a lineage of minds who saw too clearly, felt too deeply, and paid for it. But they didn't stop. and neither should you. Being a deep thinker doesn't mean being better. It means being burdened with perception, with complexity, with the constant pull to understand what others ignore. And that can feel heavy, because people don't always want to understand. Sometimes they just want comfort. Sometimes they just want you to nod and smile and keep things simple. But you weren't built for that. You weren't made to coast along and keep things easy. You were made to question, to notice the cracks, to stay awake, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, because that's what the world actually needs. Not more noise, not more agreement, but clarity, stillness, honest thought. And I know it doesn't always feel like a gift. It feels like loneliness, like walking through a crowded room and feeling completely alone, like being surrounded by voices and still craving a real conversation. But listen, you're not the only one. There are others like you, people thinking in quiet rooms, people feeling out of place at loud tables, people carrying questions they've never dared to say out loud. They exist, and whether you meet them or not, you are still connected to them by the way you see, by the way you feel, by the courage it takes to keep going. In a world obsessed with speed, deep thinkers are slow. Not lazy slow, deliberate slow. The kind of slow that builds real understanding. The kind that sees patterns, not just headlines. The kind that turns noise into meaning. And yes, that's going to make you different. But different isn't wrong. Different just means you're seeing things others don't. Yet. And they might laugh. They might look away. They might try to shrink you to make themselves more comfortable. Let them. Their reaction doesn't define your truth. Their comfort doesn't outweigh your clarity. You're not here to blend in. You're here to shine. Quietly, steadily, like a lighthouse. Not to chase ships, but to be a guide, even if they don't know they need one. Your mind is a gift, even when it aches, even when it questions everything. Even when it wonders if it would be easier to just turn it all off. Don't. Keep thinking, keep learning, keep questioning. You are carving a path, not just for yourself, but for those who will come after you. For the ones who haven't found their voice yet. For the ones who are still pretending to fit in. You're proving that it's possible to live with depth, even when the world rewards shallowness. You're showing that it's possible to stay honest, even when silence would be easier. You're reminding all of us that wisdom doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it looks like you, sitting quietly, thinking deeply, choosing your words carefully, and refusing to lie just to be liked. That matters. You may not get a round of applause. You may not be understood today. But history is full of people who were dismissed in their time and revered long after they were gone. Because truth has a way of lasting, and so do those who live by it. So when it gets lonely, when you feel like giving up, remember this: you're not alone. You're just early. And one day someone will look back on your words, your questions, your courage, and they'll feel less alone because of you. Keep going. Your clarity might not change the world overnight, but it might change someone's world. And sometimes, that's enough. If this video made you feel seen, if something in it made you pause, made you feel less alone in how you think, leave a comment. I read everyone, and if you want more videos like this, philosophy, history, the deeper questions we're not always allowed to ask, tap the like button and consider subscribing. It really helps more thinkers find their way here. People who feel like you, people who need this too. The world isn't always kind to those who see clearly, but clarity is still a gift. Stay curious. Stay honest. Stay brave enough to think differently. And if the world doesn't get you yet, wait. It always catches up.